At the end of the 19th century, thousands of turpentine fire stills filled piney woods just like these all over the southeastern United States. They were small and independently operated, and they dominated the global supply of turpentine and rosin, also known as naval stores. This was key to the entire process, the southern longleaf pine. This tree was common throughout the Southeast, and it produced a syrup-like substance known as oleoresin, more commonly called pine gum. When it was distilled, the result was turpentine and rosin. We'd like to show you how that process worked, how the still was operated at the beginning of the 20th century. We'll also learn about cooperage, the process of handcrafting the wooden barrels used for shipment of product to the market. But before we get to that, let's survey the historical landscape of the naval stores industry. In the early 1800s, southern longleaf pine trees covered an estimated 90 million acres from southeastern Virginia to Florida and west to Texas. The trees provided an abundant supply of not only high-quality lumber, but also pine gum, the underived form of turpentine and rosin, or naval stores. The term naval stores comes from earlier days when pitch and tar from pine trees were used to caulk wooden sailing ships and preserve their riggings. Production declined from 1800 to 1830 as the demand from European countries decreased. But in 1830, the demand for turpentine recovered, due largely to its use as a solvent in rubber and as an ingredient in fuel oil for lamps. By 1850, turpentine and its derivative products were in great demand around the globe. Nearly two-thirds of the world's naval stores were produced in the southern United States. Activity slowed during the Civil War, but recovered by 1870. But the methods used to collect the gum in those days harmed the pine trees and put the supply of pine gum at risk. More advanced techniques were discovered, sparking a revival of the industry and an economic boon for Georgia and Florida. By 1919, naval stores products were responsible for nearly 2% of all U.S. exports. So that's a look at the historical backdrop. Let's take a look now at where and how all of this took place. Turpentine camps were small communities with 8 or more shanties in the quarters where woodsmen and their families lived. Every camp had a barn and lot for the work animals. The larger camps commonly had a wagon shed and blacksmith shop where equipment could be repaired and tools could be fabricated as needed. Some camps included a small portable sawmill. A rosin yard was used temporarily to store rosin barrels until they were transported to one of the market centers. Some camps had barracks with a stockade and guards around the perimeter. The barracks also housed prisoners who were subleased from the state for additional labor. Side camps were used when the timber was located at a considerable distance from the main camp and still. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the common method for collecting pine gum involved the use of a narrow-bladed axe to chop out a box in the base of the tree. Above the box, the workmen used a specialized gouge to cut V-shaped grooves into the wood. Turpentiners called this a cat face. Pine gum seeped down the tree trunk and accumulated in the box. This crude boxing technique eventually killed the trees, forcing turpentiners to migrate south into new forests. North Carolina and South Carolina were the major producing states in the early 1800s, but Georgia and Florida dominated the industry by the late 1800s and early 1900s. In 1903, University of Georgia chemist Dr. Charles Hurdy introduced the cup and gutter gum collection method. This groundbreaking advancement allowed turpentiners to collect gum while causing far less harm to the trees. Turpentiners began collecting pine gum in early spring once temperatures were warm enough for the resin to flow through the tube-like ducts below the pine bark. Crews entered the pine stands and used a rossing tool to smooth the bark of the tree. They then nailed 2 metal gutters 12 to 14 inches above the ground and hung a cup on a nail just below the gutters. Next, they use a hack to cut a streak on the face of the tree resembling a V from which the gum flowed. Almost immediately, the gum began running from the face, down the gutters, and into the cup. A new streak was added to each tree face every week during the chipping season, normally running through October. Typically, 32 streaks were applied during the working season. Dipping gangs collected gum on a bi-weekly basis. Workers used a tool called a dip iron to remove the raw gum from cups into wooden buckets, hand-carried or wheelbarrowed through the drifts. When filled, these buckets weighed approximately 50 pounds. The dippers emptied these 5 to 8 gallon containers into barrels nearby or on mule-drawn wagons. Teamsters then delivered the 500-pound gum-filled casks to the fire still for cooking. We'll show you how the cooking process worked in just a moment, but there was another important part of the operation going on at the site. It was called cooperage, the construction of barrels just like this one that would hold the final product for shipment to market. The distillery complex typically included the fire still, the spirit shed and glue pot, the blacksmith shop, the rosin yard, cup cleaning vat, barn, wagon shed, and cooper's shed. Coopers were responsible for handcrafting the barrels that were used to store and ship the turpentine and rosin produced by the still. Each product called for a unique type of barrel. Rosin solidified once cooled and therefore required a lower quality barrel than liquid turpentine. As a result, rosin barrels were made out of pine, while turpentine barrels were made from oak. Turpentine barrels were often purchased from a factory rather than assembled in the cooper shed. That was because of the high difficulty in crafting them. Rosin barrels, however, were most often constructed on site by coopers. The primary components of these barrels were 20 grooved wooden slats called staves. These staves were held in place by 2 sets of metal hoops comprised of 2 large quarter hoops and 2 smaller chime hoops. A cooper began the rosin barrel assembly process by creating the first quarter hoop. He used notches in the work table to measure the quarter hoop at approximately 76 inches long by 1 1/8 inches wide. The cooper brought the hoop to the beak anvil and cut according to his measurements. He then punched 2 holes in the overlapping section of the hoop. These holes made way for 2 rivets, which were installed using a rivet set and sealed the hoop together. He then bent the first quarter hoop into a circular shape, overlapping the metal by 2.5 inches, with a hoop circumference of 73.5 inches. Next, the cooper flared the hoop. He did this by striking the hoop around the circumference on the anvil. Each strike was close to the previous one and only on one edge of the hoop. This was done to match the arc shape of the barrel and prevent it from digging into the wood. The hoop was then ready for the staves. The staves had grooves at one end, which together formed a single unified groove called the crows. The barrel head would later be placed in the crows, forming the bottom of the barrel. The cooper then moved to the raising platform and began inserting the staves one at a time. They were inserted around the interior of the quarter hoop with the crow's ends pointing downward. The Cooper used U-shaped clips made from leftover pieces of hoop metal to hold staves in place. The remaining staves were then placed around the interior of the hoop. The Cooper applied pressure to the side of the stave by pressing back toward the first clip stave, thus creating stability for the staves. At this point, the Cooper ensured the top of each stave was aligned with the edge of the hoop. Proper alignment of all 20 staves left approximately 1 3/4 inches of additional space. Next, the Cooper removed the U-clips by applying pressure to both ends of the exposed staves. This removed the excess space, allowing the staves to stand on their own. The hoop tightened as it moved down the staves because each stave was wider in the middle than at each end. This disparity gave the barrel a bow-shaped belly, increasing its strength. Once the staves could stand on their own, the Cooper used a hammer and hoop driver tool to force the hoops down even farther. The Cooper then turned the barrel over and placed it in the winch. He wrapped a rope around the barrel twice and tightened using the winch wheel. This caused the open end of the staves to curve and close. The winch could be adjusted to either loosen or tighten the end of the barrel. The Cooper left the barrel in the winch and returned to the beak anvil to assemble the 3 remaining hoops, 1 quarter hoop and 2 chime hoops. The smaller chime hoops were 72 inches in circumference, including a 2.5-inch overlap. These chime hoops were then assembled using the same steps as quarter hoops. The Cooper returned to the winch and added the second quarter hoop to the barrel. He then moved the barrel from the winch to the raising platform. The Cooper drove the corners of another U-shaped piece of hoop metal into the center of the barrel head. The Cooper used this piece as a handle to properly position the barrel head along the crows. Once the head was in place, the Cooper moved the barrel back to the winch to tighten the barrel and ensure there were no visible holes or gaps. The Cooper then placed the first chime hoop on the closed end of the barrel. He then moved the barrel back to the raising platform, where he centered the hoop over the crows. This could be eased by seating the staves, a process by which the Cooper hammered the outside of the staves until the head fit properly into the crows. The Cooper continuously checked and adjusted the position of the quarter hoops, which ultimately needed to be 10 to 12 inches from the end of the barrel. At this point of the process, Coopers often entertain themselves by using tools to drum the barrel, creating a variety of sounds and tunes. The Cooper then completed the barrel by adding the second chime hoop and hammering it on the end opposite the head. The Cooper signaled that the barrel was ready by hitting the head with a hammer, creating a ringing sound. So, with the barrels constructed and ready to go, it's time to see how the cooking process went, how they turned the pine gum into turpentine and rosin. Let's take a look. Once the extensive collection was completed, pine gum was transported to the fire still in 50-gallon barrels. These barrels, when full, could weigh up to 500 pounds and were transported on mule-drawn wagons in groups of 2 or 3 at a time. The barrels were then unloaded onto the gum deck and capped. Each barrel was laid on its side and rolled up the skid poles, which formed a wooden ramp leading to the top deck of the still. At the top, barrel caps were removed in preparation for charging the still. Smaller facilities like this one had a capacity of distilling 7 barrels of pine gum at a time. Larger stills in the same time period could handle as many as 15 barrels. A 50-gallon barrel of pine gum would yield approximately 35 gallons of rosin and 10 gallons of turpentine from the distilling process. Turpentiners charged the still by emptying pine gum into the kettle. Workers drained each barrel into the kettle for several minutes, long enough for the majority of the quick-draining gum to empty. To save time, turpentiners then moved the barrel to a drain trough off to the side. Here, the residual gum of each barrel was combined into another full barrel to be used for a later charge. After all of the gum was in the kettle, 12 to 15 gallons of water was added to help the cooking process. Once the kettle was fully charged, the cap was placed on top of the kettle and the arm was set in place, connecting the cap to the worm. Workers sealed the joints of the kettle, cap, arm, and worm in order to prevent vapors from seeping out during the cooking process. Once the joints were sealed, the fire was built and the cooking process began. The copper kettle was enclosed in a brick oven connected to a firebox. Pine firewood was used rather than oak to better regulate the temperature. The best cooking fire was one that was evenly situated across the bottom of the kettle and gradually increased the kettle temperature from 210 to 300 degrees Fahrenheit over the course of the cooking process. Finally, the firebox door was closed and the cooking process began. The turpentine and water vapors rising from the kettle flowed through the cap and arm and into the worm. This large condensing coil was submerged in a large cypress tub filled with cool water, reducing the temperature inside the worm. The lower temperature caused the vapors to condense back into a liquid mixture before exiting through the tailpipe, where they were separated and the turpentine was collected. The fire operator regularly listened for a humming sound from the tailpipe, which connected through the worm to the kettle. This allowed him to monitor how evenly the charge was being cooked. A fading hum indicated a call for water, meaning the charge was going flat and needed additional water to cook properly. The turpentine was collected using a 3-stage process with 3 link barrels made up of 2 separator barrels and 1 collection barrel. The process began as the turpentine and water mixture flowed into the first separator barrel. The 2 liquids separated readily, and turpentine floated to the top because of its lower specific gravity. A small pipe at the top of the separator barrel directed turpentine into the second separator barrel, where the process was repeated to ensure quality. Water sitting under the turpentine was released using a plug at the bottom of the barrel. Pure turpentine was then funneled from the second separator barrel into a collection barrel for transport to market. The operator gauged progress by taking a sample of the turpentine and water mixture in a glass jar. The ratio of turpentine to water approximately began at 60-40 and then steadily decreased to just 5% turpentine and 95% water. This ratio signaled the operator to allow the fire to die down and finish the cooking process. Turpentiners placed 2 wood frame strainers on top of the rosin vat. These strainers removed impurities from the rosin as it flowed from the kettle, ensuring the purity of the final product. Next, operators open the tailgate, allowing the molten rosin to flow through the strainers into the vat. Operators then close the tailgate and remove the strainers once the rosin had completely emptied. Operators poured water into the kettle from the upper platform in order to cool down the kettle temperature and prevent warping. Finally, workers dipped the rosin, a process by which they transferred the hot rosin from the vat to pine barrels used for shipping. With the rosin barreled in liquid state, the next step in the process was to grade the rosin to determine its value at market. No one could better explain the grading process than the late historic site interpreter Buster E. Cole, known for his expertise and often entertaining presentation.
There are 12 grades of it, beginning at your best grade is X, that's called excellent. WW, that's called water white. WG, that's called winter glass. Then that's Nancy, Mary, Katie, Isaac, Harry, George, Frank, Dottie, and Betty. Those are your 12 grades. It's bought and sold by those grades. Those grade names came from slave names. See, in my race, we got all colors. We got them real black, we got them almost black, we got them pecan tan, we got them focus like brown, we got them medium, we got them dark, we got them light, we got them almost white, we got them all color. They'll take a piece up and look at it. That's about the color of Nancy there. Oh, that's about the color of George there. That's about the color of Frank there. That's about the color. That went down in the Guinness Book of Records and is bought and sold by those grades to the day.
The 1940s saw the permanent decline of small-scale production of turpentine and rosin. There were two factors for that. Labor became scarce as the U.S. entered World War II, and large chemical manufacturers came up with lower-cost methods for developing the same product. By the 1960s, small-scale production effectively ceased to exist. Yet the industry remains irrevocably tied to the history, the people, and the land of the southeastern United States.
I'm going to name a few things that the turpentine and the rosin is used for. It's used for gunpowder, glass, fiberglass, acrylics, polyester, chewing gum, costume jewelry, tile, carpet, Elmer's glue, shellac, shoe polish, soap, sprinkle it on your dance floor to make it slick, and they make 9 cosmetics out of it, and 3 perfumes are made out of it. Gymnastics, you got a rosin bag. Bowling, you got a rosin bag. Tennis, you got a rosin bag. Baseball pitcher, he can use a rosin bag. Fiddler put rosin on his bow. Ballet dancers put it on the shoes. And they make pine soil, it has turpentine in it. Pine spray, it has turpentine in it. Disinfect has turpentine in it. Printer's ink has turpentine in it. It's a paint remover, it's a paint thinner, and you make paint out of it. There's 129 uses for the two products combined, all come out of an old pine tree.